What is the most disturbing fact about serial killers that you know? The Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway. When I was a new teacher at a Native American school, we had Dave Reichart come speak to us about how Native American women made up a much higher number of victims of serial killers. He told us that when they were interviewing Ridgway after they finally got him to admit his crimes, he had raped and killed a prostitute one night, and then the next evening after dinner he went to run an errand with his 6-year-old son. His son fell asleep in his truck, so he decided to drive back to the corpse and had sex with it while his kid was still sleeping in the truck. They asked him what would he have done if his son had caught him, and he answered, "Well, I would have killed him, of course." The detective said he said this casually and without any emotion. One of my JR High friend's dads worked with him at Kenworth. Apparently, he used to leave random jewelry in the ladies' bathroom. We now know it was probably from victims. Everyone there was creeped out by him. My mom's best friend was a taxi driver during the height of his killings and thought she knew who it was. She died before he was indicted. I still wonder if she was right. There was a taxi driver named Melvin who was extensively questioned and later determined not to have killed anyone. He was just kind of weird. Imagine cops telling you that it turns out you're just kind of weird, but you're free to go. You know he did something weird to celebrate. I'm guessing the idea was that if no one claimed the jewelry, the person that found it could keep it and would sometime wear it. That would allow him to have trophies without worrying about being caught with them, and means he could enjoy seeing other women unwittingly displaying his trophies for him at work. Truly diabolical. One of the worst, Pedro Lopez, served 14 years in jail. Then he was released 2 years early, put in an asylum, then was declared sane and released on a $70 bail. He promptly disappeared. How do you kill 110 people and have a chance of release? That's fucking wild. If I remember correctly, it essentially boiled down to the way the laws were worded. That was the maximum sentence the judiciary could give him at the time. He also did his deeds in countries and areas that had experienced war and violence, and the police were largely paid for by the rich, so only cared about crimes that affected them. I believe he also disappeared shortly after release, and one of the common theories is that the people took their own justice. Actually, LATAM problem in catching serial killers is much deeper than only caring about what rich people pay for. In my country, Colombia, is really hard because there's a lot of internal violence involving guerrillas and paramilitaries, narcos, etc. So that's why it's really hard to distinguish. That's why Garavito was caught so late, because at the start they thought the kids that were found were victims of internal war, not because there was a crazy serial rapist and killer going around doing atrocities. While these claims are unverifiable, it is known that Lopez was briefly captured by indigenous people from the Ayacucho region in south-central Peru after attempting to abduct a 9-year-old girl. 8. The Ayacuchoans stripped Lopez of his clothes and belongings and buried him in the sand. 9. However, an American missionary convinced them to release Lopez and turn him over to the police. 9. The police did not detain Lopez, and he was instead expelled from the country. 9. No, not the missionary. This is like the British dude who didn't shoot Hitler when he had the chance. By being a good and idealistic person, they inadvertently caused a crazy number of innocents torturous deaths. He should have stayed in the sand. I imagine to a psychopath, a missionary saving you from being buried alive is like God is approving of your work and saving you himself. Carla Homolaka pleaded down to manslaughter after participating in the murders of at least 3 teen girls, including her own sister. She served a short sentence, after which she married her defense lawyer's brother. They had 3 kids together, and she lives free in Quebec. Don't forget, she also participated in raping her little sister, and made a video/sex tape saying how much she loved raping her sister and watching Paul do the same. She rubbed a rose all over his naked body to take to his sister's grave. She told him she wanted to have 4 kids with him so she could give them to him to rape, and dressed up as and after like her sister and had sex with Paul. There never would have been a plea deal if the police had properly searched Bernardo's home and found the videos showing that she had participated willingly in the killings. But they didn't. The tapes were only found when Bernardo told his lawyer about them. Incompetence. Fucking what? Please tell me that you're a horror author. Nope, I could not make that up. And that's a pretty PG version. She made a deal to testify against Bernardo, and only after her lighter sentencing did the tapes come out that showed she was more than a willing participant in the killings. They called it the deal with the devil. The deal was a massive failure of the prosecution though. Homolaka obviously did what every other person in this regard is doing, hiring a good lawyer. Not defending Homolaka, she clearly deserves to spend her life in prison. But there was a clear ineptitude of the prosecutors in this case to do their job. I still don't understand how this happened. In deals like this, it's almost always okay, but if we find out you are telling shit or new evidence comes to light you were involved, more to the extent that you explain, the deal is off. The prosecutors gave her total immunity to anything after the fact. That was just plain stupid. The fault for this squarely lies at the feet of the Canadian justice system. It shouldn't even be possible to make a deal like this. The video she made with Bernardo after murdering her sister and then acting like her to please him is so fucked up. How she is free is beyond me. I'm honestly surprised she's still alive. The Canadian newspapers always report it whenever she moves and changes her name. They're trying. She can't go near schools anymore. The community got together with a lawyer and had her banned. She shouldn't have been able to go near schools in the first place, let alone volunteer at one. If I was a parent of one of those school kids, I would want somebody fired over this. Richard Chase, the vampire of Sacramento, believed if a house was unlocked or the door was open that the victims were inviting him in. He believed it gave him permission to ambush them, kill the entire family, mutilate their bodies, and drink their blood. Literally why, even though I live in a very safe area, I lock everything at night, just because of this guy. Got a box fan or AC unit in the window. Yeah. Chase and Richard Ramirez both got into houses that way. I've definitely recommended friends put a 2x4 in the window to hold it shut on the window AC because of shit like this. It's not a bulletproof idea, but it definitely makes it much harder to get in through that. Did a research paper back in college, and if you look at the Hunting Humans, the encyclopedia of serial killers, it is disturbing how many were in jail previously for assault, rape, manslaughter, etc., and let out to extend their activity. Every time I think of something like this, I think of how Bundy was pulled over with literal remains in his car and talked his way away from his vehicle being searched. Or how Dahmer had a victim given back to him. The Dahmer victim, who got free just to be given back by the cops, was chilling. Heartbreaking. He used the cops' distaste for the gay stuff to get away with a lot of things. Kid was 14 as well. How do you give a confused and distraught child to a 30-year-old man without a second thought? One of those two police ended up serving as president of the Milwaukee Police Association. Madness, no consequences whatsoever. He was gay and a minority. The cops didn't gaff. He was also naked and obviously intoxicated. So a 14-year-old naked child under the influence of something, wandering the streets in the middle of the night and asking for help. And bleeding BC Dahmer had already been drilling on his head. F those cops, like really. Those two women tried so hard to get the cops to realize this cannot be an okay situation. Or the Green River Killer who talked some cops into leaving from his house, where he had a prostitute captured or dead inside. She was a Filipino prostitute, and her boyfriend had been following to keep her safe, saw them enter the house. But when he and her family called the cops for help, they believed the innocent-looking white guy over the prostitute's kin and left without checking the story at all. Also, two of Ridgway's victims were pregnant. Golden State Killer was a fucking cop himself. What freaks me out is that we have probably only caught the tip of the iceberg. He was a cop for a very short amount of time because he was fired for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent. Literally caught stealing the things he needed to break into someone's home so that he wouldn't leave a trail of purchasing them or the clerk seeing him. Then even went and threatened and stalked the chief that fired him. Even then nobody thought to keep an eye on the guy. I think about this a lot with Rodney Alcala, aka the dating game killer. That dude never should have been released from prison after he nearly killed and sexually assaulted that 8-year-old girl. So sickening, that guy. Charles Manson begged authorities to let him stay in prison prior to being released. He was institutionalized and prison was the most stable home he ever lived in. He fit in socially. It was the best food he ever ate on a regular basis. The attire and climate was the coolest he ever had in warmer seasons and the warmest he ever had in colder seasons. He's quoted as saying, "There's plenty of sex and it's some of the best I've ever had in prison." Ed Kemper murdered his damn grandparents and was released 5 years later. David Parker Ray, aka the Toy Box Killer, would abduct women and then subject them to weeks of physical and sexual torture before letting them go after giving them a cocktail of drugs to make them forget their time together. The worst part, though, is he had a recording he would play for newly abducted women about what to expect. Transcripts of this recording exist and, I say this as a true crime fan who has read some fucked things, it's one of the most disturbing things I've ever read. The weirdest thing to me is that the recording ends with, "Have a nice day," like what was said beforehand wasn't incredibly fucked up. Especially the part involving his German Shepherd. It also messes with me the idea that this was so routine he recorded it. He thought, "I'm tired of repeating myself during this post-kidnapping orientation, so I'm just going to record it." Also, we don't know and will never know his true victim count. I just listened to the case file episodes on this. His adult daughter was complicit. Would kidnap the girls and join him in torturing them, and I think she got a total of like 2 years in prison. She's been released and lives not too far from me. Kinda freaks me out tbh. Lots of people here saying they heard the audio. They heard reenactments. FBI never released the tape. Only the transcript. I'm telling you, there are at least 2 serial killers in Trinity County, CA. Probably living in either Weaverville, Lewiston, or possibly Hayfork. But it's for sure one of those towns. They're super small towns with just a little over or under 3,000 people each, but way too many people go missing. Google it. I'm not kidding, so many people just vanish/are found. It's not just hikers getting lost. Though that happens pretty often out there too, but I can't even begin to count the amount of bodies that'd suddenly be found out in the woods, are found in the rivers, or floating in the lake. Even kids vanish sometimes. There's literally a 2-decades-old little memorial set up in something Moon Park that's next to the Joss house for one of them. I'd talk about a certain case of someone I knew IRL who literally rented from us who vanished. But I'm not sure the subreddit rules about that, as it's in that weird middle ground of being a cold case/active, so I'm just going to avoid dropping her name here. The cops out there always brush off the bodies and missing people as a drug problems, but that's a load of bullshit. They care so little that they've even taken to calling them trim migrants, aka trimming immigrants, because they come out to work the pot harvest. I know I can't speak for all of them, but from what I grew up with, most of them are just chill hippie types who will literally stop to help you change a flat tire or chase down your horse for you if it gets away. Hell, they'd even show up for the search parties. And if that wasn't enough reason to doubt the drug claim, half the time, they're the ones printing off missing person flyers and handing them around themselves. Sure, a few of the head guys are straight up criminals you don't want to mess with, but they're also the ones basically keeping the towns afloat, and we all knew it. The bosses would buy fertilizer in bulk from stores or by paying farmers for manure. And that would keep the hardware and grocery stores alive, because let me tell you, they needed a ton of stuff for their compounds. I literally remember one of the big bosses coming down with a translator and telling people he'd give them 20 grand cash for any information that led to whoever was doing it. Then the sheriff told us that anyone caught accepting money and giving him information would be arrested for criminal activity. And if that wasn't enough, I used to know a couple of the search and rescue guys who'd go out on searches. And they'd always say there were sections of the woods they were told not to go into. I'm not joking when I say some of them eventually quit because they swore there was something off about the people running the searches. We're not talking about risky areas either, just literal fields and some of the less rugged hills. But the main reason no one's been caught yet, other than the fact nothing's done about it, is the fact that Trinity County has no shortage of places to hide things. There are tons of abandoned mine shafts, forests, lakes, and I shit you not, there are even tunnels under Weaverville's main street that connect to all the businesses that connect back to the old Chinese temple. I'm not going to make this any longer by shoving a history lesson in here, but back in the gold rush, when they were building the down, Chinese workers weren't allowed on the roads, so they wound up carving their own roads underground. If you think I'm shitting you, you can literally still tour them today. There used to be more, but supposedly those collapsed, but I'm not so sure. If that wasn't enough, being out in the woods means there's mountain lions. And whenever they scream, the locals write about them all the time on the local Facebook groups, just in case it's not actually a cougar. I loved living out there, but we just couldn't do it anymore after our renter vanished out of nowhere. Nothing was done about it. She was a local since birth, and the cops still called her just another trim migrant. Ed Gain used to give his neighbors venison. At his murder trial, he said he never killed a deer. Reminds me of the guy who was part of a cannibal group of child soldiers. But later in life, when he was a reformed adult, he bought some street meat and recognized it was human and called the cops on the vendor. Whoa, that's nuts. Do you know his name or if there was a documentary about it? It's an old Vice documentary called Cannibal Warlords of Liberia. Ed Gain was the inspiration for 3 separate horror franchises, and at least one director, when asked why they split him into 3 separate characters, replied with, "To make it more believable." I forget the exact number, but the FBI estimated that at any given time there are 50+ active murderers in the US that no one has yet identified as a serial killer. Correction, as many as 500, not 50. Truck drivers, man. One is probably reading this post right now. Serial killer. If you're reading this, please stop killing. It's not nice. You know, I think he'll listen and the torturous murders will stop now. Thank you. If one is reading this post, I'm pretty sure yours would be the comment most likely for them smile and upvote. So if you're right, then one of the dozen or so upvoted your comment is likely to receive is a serial killer. Dean Corll inserted glass tubes into the urethras of teenage boys he abducted, which he then shattered with a ball-peen hammer while he had them bound. He would do this and other terrible things to them for up to days at a time before murdering them. Also, Corll invented the handcuff trick that Gacy later used. The handcuff trick was you would tell a naive young person that you could show them a cool trick on how to escape handcuffs. Have them bind themselves, then tell them the trick is you need a key and proceed to murder them. And the fact that 2 of his victims were brothers taken at 2 different times, can you imagine what it would be like for their parents? A lot of his victims were related. He had 2 brothers fight each other telling them he'd let the victor go and still ended up murdering them both. Not to mention another 2 he kept for almost a week. If I'm not mistaken, they were shot numerous times by Wayne and left to bleed out. But by the time they got back, one was still bleeding where Wayne promptly shot him. Atrocities on another level. The entire town lost so many people that almost everyone that generation knew someone killed by Coral. I find it interesting how that guy isn't more famous. You can make dark jokes about Gacy dressing like a clown or Dahmer eating people, but Coral's story is just grim. Probably because he was killed by an accomplice before he was caught. So not really a ton of press about him. Wayne told a story about one of the boys he'd brought over as a victim passing out early. Dean had a change of heart and told Wayne to drive him home. While in the back seat in front of his house, the boy came to and was all, "Nah." Wayne, come on, let's keep partying. So eventually Wayne took him back to Dean's where he was tortured and killed. Dean Coral gets my vote for most slept on American serial killer. The deaths are the stuff of your worst nightmares. Absolutely insane story, and we don't even know if we know everything he did. Don't really even have a reliable body count. It's weird to me how unnormal they're in that they could do heinous things and just go about their day. Like it doesn't affect them at all. I watched the Night Stalker documentary about Richard Ramirez, and he just didn't seem to feel any type of way about anything. And his victims were all different ages, races, and genders. He didn't really have a preference. No certain thing that triggered him. Sometimes he murdered. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes it was SA. Sometimes it was torture. He just chose randomly and made it up as he went. BTK stopped killing because he got too caught up in his family life. He had kids and a job, so he had a lot of juggle, so he just stopped killing. Then his kids grew up and he got bored, so he decided to taunt the police and get caught. John Wayne Gacy had so many victims cramped in his basement, crawl space, to the point where when the bodies decomposed, they fused, melded, together, and there are still some who have yet to be identified. Well, that's a sentence I didn't know I'd never read before. I regret everything that led to this moment. John Wayne Gacy killed his first victim due to a misunderstanding. He picked up a 16-year-old who had just arrived in his city from out of town and brought him home with him. Nothing sexual happened. Then in the morning the kid went to make breakfast and happened to be holding a kitchen knife in his hand when he went to Gacy's room to wake him. Gacy mistakenly thought the kid was trying to do him in and killed him as a result, even when the boy showed no signs of resistance and even signaled he was surrendering. That murder was the one that set him off on his killing spree because he realized he got off on killing people. What's even worse is that the boy came from a loving family, and right before he met Gacy he was traveling to Iowa to see his aunt. They didn't bother looking for him when he failed to contact them because they were used to him traveling extensively and simply hoped he would call them eventually. Their clue that he was never coming back was when his grandfather died 2 years after he was murdered and he didn't show up at the funeral. How often many of them could be caught or practically did something in plain sight and the investigators or police fumbled the ball. The kid who ran from Jeffrey Dahmer and was let back to him by police is mind-boggling. Konarak sent the Sumphone's escape and Fate the escape. After Dahmer had drilled a hole in the 14-year-old's skull and injected acid into it, Konarak managed to escape when Dahmer left the apartment to buy more alcohol. Naked and bleeding, Konarak staggered into the street, where he was found by Dahmer's neighbor, Glenda Cleveland, and her family. They immediately called the police. Police intervention, when officers John Balserzak and Joseph Gabrish arrived. Dahmer returned and convinced them that Konarak was his 19-year-old lover who had simply had too much to drink. Despite the pleas of Glenda Cleveland and her family, the officers accepted Dahmer's story. They escorted Konarak back into Dahmer's apartment, where he was killed about 30 minutes later. Failed investigation, the police did not run a basic identity check on Dahmer, which would have revealed his probation status after a prior molestation conviction involving Konarak's older brother, Somzak. Aftermath, the Syntha-Sumphone family filed a lawsuit against the city of Milwaukee and the 2 officers, which was settled for $850,000. The officers were initially fired, then reinstated with back pay after appealing. The officers were initially fired, then reinstated with back pay after appealing. Infuriating to read. The incompetency is borderline malicious. Dorothea Puente escaped police custody in 1988 by asking the cops if she could go next door and grab a cup of coffee. She was an old lady, so they let her, and they ended up finding her in LA a bit later. Albert Fish wrote a letter to the parents of a little girl he killed. telling them how tasty she was when he ate her. Even worse, the mother of the family couldn't read, so her son and the victim's older brother had to read it out loud to her. The only edible thing in Jeffrey Dahmer's fridge was a 6-pack of Miller High Life. He'd argue it was all edible. Jeffrey Dahmer's mom came over for lunch one day, and while they were about to sit down, she whispered to him, "Jeff, I have to confess that I really don't like your neighbors." Jeffrey replied, "Okay, then just eat the salad." Rose Westwood had gotten away with her part of the crimes her and her husband committed, but didn't because she made a mistake about the disappearance of Fred's stepdaughter. The police did the maths and realized that Fred was in jail when the stepdaughter was killed, so it had to be Rose. She also became besties with Myra Hindley from the Moores murders in prison. We only catch the bad ones. Guys like the Golden State take decades to find, and it's usually dumb luck. There was a serial killer in Toronto. At one point in the investigation, a tip led them to a very secluded cabin in the woods where humans were being killed, cooked, and eaten. It turned out to be unrelated to their serial killer. When they finally caught their killer, he was seconds away from murdering his next victim. Who was it? The one that comes to mind is the guy who had a landscape business and would bury the men he killed on the properties of his clients. They pretend to be so normal in everyday life it is frightening. Serial rapist Philip Garrido was married, had a nice house in Antioch, California, if memory serves, after getting off parole from Nevada to California for kidnapping/rape only to pick up an 11-year-old girl from a bus stop in South Lake Tahoe and keep her for the next 18 years. His wife Nancy made Ghislaine Maxwell look like saint. The lead theory, the reason there were so many serial killers in the 70s is because lead use was at its peak. Lead pipes, leaded gasoline, etc. The decline in lead exposure aligns pretty directly with decline in serial killers in nations that banned it in gas and such. Obligatory note that correlation does not mean causation. Worse thought, that lead didn't create serial killers, just made them sloppy enough to get caught. There was an FBI agent that said there were so many that they designated as serial killers that never get caught or linked with enough evidence to alert the media. Scary to think there's 100s that just never get outed. Does the decline in lead exposure also correlate with developments in surveillance and forensic technology? Because my thought has always been that it would be way harder to serial kill these days, given nearly everyone has a phone with a camera in it and security cameras are all over the place. One little murder maybe, even a spree, but to gather multiple victims over time without getting caught these days just doesn't seem as easy to me. Head trauma is a huge contributing factor. I was surprised to hear how many of them had significant head injuries as kids, not even from abuse necessarily, just from childhood accidents. Maybe we have fewer serial killers now partly because we protect our heads better? Just knowing the BTK called his climaxes during his killings Sparky Big Time absolutely disgusts me. The toy box killer effectively wiped the memories of his victims using a combination of sodium pentothal, phenobarbital, and other barbiturates. There's a lot of really fucked up shit and I could go on.